Read along with Hugh and Dr. Arnn and enjoy Winston Churchill's My Early Life on a deeper level. Purchase your very own copy of My Early Life at the Hillsdale College bookstore. Just visit hillsdale.edu/radio. Learn about the fascinating first 30 years in the life of one of the most provocative and compelling leaders of the 20th century, Winston Churchill in My Early Life. hillsdale.edu/radio. That's hillsdale.edu/radio to buy your copy of My Early Life.
Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. There's the music. There's the familiar music. It's on my fault. I went early. Dr. Larry Arnn is back, and we are into Chapter 16 of this fabulous book, My Early Life. Chapter 16, I Leave the Army. Before I get into the specifics of this, Dr. Arnn, there's a lot of stuff about Churchill that's been produced, including Finest Hour, a movie of which you approved, and you were on the set when they were making it. There are mini-series galore. There are lots of books. Has anyone ever done the theatrical presentation in like a mini-series of the young Churchill life? Because it's absolutely 12 episodes of adventure.
Oh, yeah. So it turns out the answer to that is yes. The late Carl Foreman, who was the genius behind the movie High Noon and was a friend of Martin Gilbert's, made a series called Young Winston's Wars, starring an actor named Simon Ward, who was very good. And it's a very good series, and I think one can still find it around. And it captures, what kind of guy was he? He was something else, and he was moving. And it's lovely reading. I always say to people, what should I read about Churchill? And the answer is, first of all, are you going to devote the rest of your life to it? Because you can. But I always say, My Early Life is a great place to start because you get a sense of his character. And this is the mature man reflecting on the young man. And his sense of humor and his sense of adventure is still with him. And so he conveys all that.
Now, in this chapter,
it's very fine.
It's not about any major thing. It's about a lot of small things, but each one matters. The first thing is, you ever heard of a man being flayed alive? He's on his boat. He's been to 2 wars already in India, and he's done with the River War that we've talked about at length. And he's sailing back to England, and his friend, whose last name I cannot pronounce, Dick Molyneux, has been grievously wounded, and Churchill's keeping him company when the doctor comes in and he needs a skin graft. So first he goes to the nurse, this big, raw-boned Irish doctor, according to Churchill, and he flays her skin off. Then he turns to Churchill, and he just happens to be there. It's your turn. And Churchill recounts, they sawed, 2 square inches off of his arm?
Yeah. There's a correspondence much later between Churchill and this man Molyneux. And Churchill's wondering how his skin is doing and whether you're still carrying around a bit of me with you. And it's very amusing. See, if that isn't that interesting. Like Churchill, has just related in a previous chapter a cavalry charge. And what's that like? But now this thing is in some ways a more vivid memory, as it would be. He
calls it an ordeal.
It's terrible. And the anesthetics were not so advanced back then as they are today.
There were none. But the nurse wasn't given a choice, and he wasn't given a choice. I just can't imagine it in modern times. All right. He arrives back in England, and then we get a couple of pages about money. And the interesting phrase about his father is, my father died at the moment when his new fortune almost exactly equaled his debts. So there is no estate for Churchill to inherit. He's got to make his way, and he commends his example to his children. What was that way?
Well, Churchill made most of his money in his life writing. And so he figured out that he was not in remunerative lines of work. If you're a cavalry officer, you can't, you got to pay, it's better to be rich because you got to bring resources to it. They'll pay you just enough, maybe, to keep up your uniforms and your horses. Then after that, you got to eat. And so he's never going to make his way that way, he figures out. And then the other thing was he's going to run for Parliament. It's very amusing in this chapter. He explains what that was like because he goes to the Conservative office, and he's a very well-known and well-connected young man, but he hadn't done anything except go to war and write some articles. And he says, you just imagine Winston Churchill walking in the Conservative Central Office in London, where he would eventually go many times, and say, please, sir, how do I go about this? And they love the idea of him right away. He's got some public notoriety, and he's got connections through his dad and his family writ large. But then they acquaint him with the hard fact. I'll find you a seat, but the seats that you're likely to win are going to expect you to have some dough and to spread it around in the constituency. Because the people, the district, the conservative associations, they're called, in the constituencies, if you're the guys who get to be the precinct leaders and the association leaders in a safe seat, you're in a position of power, and everybody comes to you, and they want you to adopt them. And then they say, how much you going to give to our favorite charities? And how much you going to give for building the conservative ranks in our constituency? It's for sale, sort of, right?
And it has not changed. When the National Republican Congressional Committee needs to find a candidate, they usually go out and say, who can raise $1 million? And will then begin to take you seriously. Or maybe it's 500, I don't know what it is. But they have to concern themselves with who can raise or has already raised a substantial amount of money because it's expensive to run for office. You mentioned he went to the Conservative Party office. He meets there with a Mr. Middleton, the skipper. Right? So the skipper, I love this phrase. When parties lose election through bad leadership or foolish policy or because of mere slackness in the swing of the pendulum, they always sack the party manager. So it is only fair that these functionaries should receive all the honors of success. And so the skipper wants Churchill, but he's told his subordinates, don't give Churchill anything until Churchill gives us something. They won't even give him a speech. Churchill has to trick them into giving him a speech.
That's right. Yeah. Well, he finds if you're going to run for office, it's true in America today, too, by the way. And, in a contested seat, $1 million ain't even a start. Yep. Right. But so Churchill could get a constituency that he was bound to lose. Nobody wants those. And
forlorn hopes, they're called. Forlorn hopes.
That's right. They won't be asking him for money. They'll say, please come run.
Yeah.
We need a candidate. Well, the same thing is true about speeches, right? They've got he discovered that they have a long list of people asking for speakers. And, he got one of the ones where people don't really want to go. Yeah. So have Hugh Hewitt and Larry Arnn given many speeches to places where the people were just glad to have anybody at all show
Amen.
Up. And,
yes.
And here's another thing. Churchill is a renowned orator. If you make a list of who are the great orators in history, Winston Churchill's name will come up in the top 5 over and over and over again. He tells about his first one, and he was very nervous. And he for years he did this, not just in this year when he gives his first one, for years after, he memorized every word. And he prepared and prepared. He never stopped doing that. But he said he writes in a couple times in different places. He writes, "The flowers of rhetoric are hothouse plants." That means they have to be artificially produced so that they don't seem artificial. And I just love the charming way he makes fun of the positions that he took. And he ran in Oldham, which is a seat outside. Oh, wait, that's the next chapter.
That's the next chapter. But he does practice at Bath. And he says, I asked how long I ought to speak, and being told that about a quarter of an hour would do, I confined myself rigorously to 25 minutes. I found by repeated experiments with a stopwatch that I could certainly canter over the course in 20 minutes. Above all, one must not be hurried or flurried. One must not yield too easily to the weaknesses of audiences. There they were. What could they do? They had asked for it, and they must have it.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I got him now.
I got him, and I've got you. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned to the Hillsdale Dialogue. Dr. Larry Arnn will be right back with me. Remember, all things Hillsdale, hillsdale.edu. If you want to find all the previous dialogues, go to hughforhillsdale.com. And, of course, you can go to hillsdalecollegecruise.com, see if they got any spaces left on the ship that leaves from Portugal soon, ends up in London. But everything is at hillsdale.edu, including this dialogue soon. Stay tuned. I'll be back with Dr. Arnn.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn talking about Winston Churchill's My Early Life. Now, how did all this happen? How'd you come to be in England?
I'll tell you. I was a Rotary Fellow in England, which is how I went over there and worked on and met my wife there. So Rotary, I owe my life to Rotary. If you're a Rotary Fellow, you have to give Rotary speeches. And I was frightened to death. And I gave several over there, right? And I'm in front of a bunch of foreigners. And I gave one, and it's my greatest rhetorical failure. I went to Dulwich Village to give a talk about Winston Churchill, which I was there to study. Dulwich Village is a charming little thing in south of London, a little village. And we're in this room, and there's like 16 people there, and they're all old. And there's a mahogany paneled room and a roaring fire.
Oh, my.
And I began to talk, and I had no means of departing from my text. I was frightened to death. And one by one, they started going to sleep. And here's my failure. I eventually began to see the humor in the situation. And I thought, if I can put that last guy to sleep, I could leave
quietly, and
they could wake up and wonder what happened. Well, he stayed awake. That was my failure.
Well, I don't even want to guess how many speeches I've given. I would guess you are my equal because you started at it sooner than I did. But the art of the speech is here revealed very cleverly without giving a lesson in it. And he is not sparse in giving himself praise about how well he did. In fact, I had to look up the word leaderette because he said the Morning Post wrote a whole column about his speech, and they wrote an appreciative leaderette. And I've never seen that word before, so I looked it up. And I find in British English, it's a short editorial that is printed in the same type as the newspaper's leaders. So that's big print. They like Winston Churchill in big print. And he wants us to know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and see, the other thing is all politicians are different from all other politicians. When Donald Trump loves to praise himself in superlatives, and everything else he likes, by the way, Superlative is the only degree that he knows. And that is, I can put up with that all day because I'm used to it and because I know he's got a sense of humor about himself. Well, Churchill is more subtle, right? So he does make a lot of fun of himself about this speech, and then he gives rise to some accounts of his triumph. And, Churchill was, he doesn't mention what it is, but he says that his actual first speech was given in the Strand near a pub where some ladies of questionable profession were forced to abandon their station, and he gave a little talk in favor of them.
We did talk about it. That was a speech. There weren't many people there. Dr. Arnn, before we turn to, quote, other and more serious affairs, meaning polo, I do want to talk about his little rumination on Oxford, because he sits down with these very high-born men, Lord Hugh Cecil, Lord Percy, Lord Balcarres. I felt indeed I was the earthen pot among the brass. Lord Hugh had this amazing rhetorical ability. Second word I had to look up. He had held the House of Commons spellbound on the subject of Erastians and high churchmen. I didn't know what an Erastian was, so I went and looked that up, and our audience can go do that if it was. But he always seems to assume that his audience knows exactly what he's talking about. So is that good for a writer to do?
In the right measure, sure. We both have a friend in Roger Kimball.
Yep.
And he's a really great guy, and I read everything he writes. He sends it to me. But I seldom get through an article without having to look up a word. And, I've been around a while. I know a few words. But that's his style, right? And he sticks those in there because he's learned, or let me put it in his kind of term, erudite. And that's a style. Churchill mixes things like that in part for the dramatic flair, but the staple with Churchill, because he writes that in the first thing we have that he ever wrote in the way of an essay called Scaffolding of Rhetoric, short, simple English words. And if you read through this book, you will see the sentences are generally short, generally declarative, and the words are familiar and tend to have an old lineage, right? Eloquence begins with clarity. So the first thing you got to do is make it clear what you're trying to say. And Churchill is very good at that.
I love the fact that after he talks to these high-born members of the House already, the Lords, and they're very talented, he said, after this encounter, I had the idea that I must go to Oxford when I came back from India after the tournament. But after some rumination, I could not contemplate toiling at Greek irregular verbs after having commanded British regular troops. So after much pondering, I had to, with keen regret, put the plan aside. So I wanted to ask you as a college president, what's the age range that people ought to pursue college? Not continuing education, not lifelong curiosity, but college.
Well, it varies, of course. We've had some students who are older, who are grand. But, the traditional thing has a reason behind it. When you're 18 years old, you've got to the place where you can think, and you've got some foundation of understanding under you. And now you can start drinking from a fire hose. And you've got the energy for that and the curiosity for that. And also, the idea is pretty soon you're going to get busy with your life because you're going to have to make a living. And so now's the time to focus and do it intensely. And Churchill was not ready to do that when he was 18 years old. He writes in Education at Bangalore, a chapter in this book that we've talked about. It was not until my 22nd year, do I remember that year rightly, that the desire of learning came upon me. Well, that's the second thing, right? You need to want to know. I will tell you that a common experience here is that when they come here, they're first of all, they're afraid because we help encourage that. We want them to come for the right reason and get ready to work. But second, they soon encounter, oh, wow, this is different than anything I ever saw before. And so we they need to be, they need to be charmed by that. They need to say, wow, I could spend the rest of my life doing this.
For its
Still
own
won't get to the bottom of
purpose,
it.
not to impress, but because it has its own return, it's virtuous thing to do. And on that moment, pause. It's virtuous to take a pause as well. I'll be right back with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of our hundreds of dialogues can also be found at hughforhillsdale.com. hughforhillsdale.com. Be right back with Dr. Arnn. Stay tuned.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, Hillsdale Dialogue underway, part of our series on Winston Churchill's book, My Early Life, which we've been in for a few weeks and will be for a few more with my guest, Dr. Larry Arnn of Hillsdale College, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Now let's go to the important stuff, polo. I have never seen a polo game. Have you seen polo games?
I have watched 2 on the internet, both featuring a member of our board, Steve Van Andel, who has won the U.S. Open Polo Championship once and been in the finals 5 times. And so by knowing Steve, I know quite a lot about it, as he's explained it to me. And it is awesome. And it is, it's, you got to have a whole bunch of horses. They got to be trained. You got to move them around the country. You're moving at great speed. And the way polo works, by the way, Churchill was playing army polo, which is very, in those days, very elite, very excellent, right? And they won the championship.
Well, they're cavalrymen, yes.
But the way it works in polo in America is, and probably around the world, is that there's a handicapping system. And a team has a certain number of points. And every rider is assigned a handicap. And so, the really greatest riders and polo players in the world, they have a high number. And it takes up a lot of your team's things. So you can't stack your team with really excellent things.
I did not know that.
And the style is, and the style is that, one of the riders is the owner of the team. Let's say, supplies the money. And it matters a lot how good he is, because he can contribute a lot, and then that saves some economy. Then you can maybe get an extra really great player. Steve keeps in his office a picture of a polo player falling off a horse. And it turns out, and he told me the story behind it. He had a league player on his team, and he had a phrase. He would say, "The best players never fall," and he would say that with some, arrogance. And so Steve actually has a picture of him
falling.
He keeps it up.
Well, he goes back. Churchill goes all the way from England to India. I mean, he's been to the war and back. He's going to go back just to play in a polo tournament. And sure enough, they end up in the Dragoon Guards and they meet in the final. 2 lines. You would not have thought it was a game at all, but a matter of life and death. And because it was close, it was so close at the end. It seemed like it was dragging on interminably. He writes, I kept on thinking, would God that Knight or Blucher would come. Now, he gives no explanation. I know what that means, but, he expects his readers to understand what that means. But if you don't know who Blucher is, you have no idea what it means. Yeah.
Well, Blucher is not the woman in Young Frankenstein, no. Frau Blucher. She is named for the man who commanded the Austrian troops.
They're Germans, I think. I think they're Prussians.
Germans who intervened at Waterloo to turn the battle and defeat Napoleon. And, Wellington is in overall command of the Allies in the battle. And Blucher shows up and saves the battle. So he was waiting for him to come.
And he did eventually come, as we will to the end of this chapter shortly. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn. When we went to break, talking about Winston Churchill's autobiography, My Early Life, we were talking about Blucher. And Blucher is a figure in the Battle of Waterloo, I believe. I think it's a quote. I think he's quoting Wellington, would God that Knight or Blucher come? Because it was a close-run thing, as I recall. That's another thing. And they had won. Yeah. And they had a great deal of fun after they won. And he ends up by talking about, all right, what good is polo? What good is the Army versus this Oxford thing? And he writes, discipline and comradeship were lessons it taught, and perhaps after all, they are just as valuable as the lore of the universities. Still, one would like to have both. And so I guess the student athlete at Hillsdale is in the best of both worlds.
I think so. Yeah. Churchill played polo till he was 50. And Churchill, I'm going to go back to say something about education. Churchill, for the rest of his life, is a spokesperson for late learners, he said, in a very great speech given in the same week as the Iron Curtain speech. He said, and I want to say a word for the late learners. And that's in 1946, right? So he's Churchill, and Churchill intervened. It's one reason why the Hillsdale Dialogues are good, if they're good, why people like them, if they do. When Churchill's second premiership, after the Socialists had been in it for 5 years, they had built a Ministry of Education, which I personally believe is a bad idea. And they were about to do a major initiative on adult education. And Churchill stopped it and reformed the curriculum away from hobbies and retraining for jobs and refocused it on the classics. And then he gave the speech introducing it himself. And in the speech, the argument goes roughly, just think to reach a late stage in your life and get to pick up these treasures. You see, so Churchill valued that. And you asked me, what is the right age for college students? It's typically for the young, almost fully grown. But it can't really work until the desire of learning comes upon you.
Which is why I will now do a shameless plug for the hillsdale.edu site. You will find many courses. Among my favorites is Dr. Arnn teaching 4 totalitarian novels, Darkness at Noon, 1984, Brave New World, and That Hideous Strength, my favorite novel. And they're not to be undertaken without sitting down to watch them. I don't think you can listen to them when you're doing something else. I suppose you could, but I think they're meant to be understood and explained in the sequence that they unfold. And I love it. I just think, and I think they're very popular, are they not? Not just that one, but all the courses at hillsdale.edu.
Yeah, it's getting close to 5 million people have taken them now. I think we added 1 million in the last year, and we're going to do a bunch more. There's a really great one coming up soon on the founding of America, and it's going to be fun. It's a bunch of our professors talking with some documentary footage and stuff. And so it's very powerful.
There are 2 more things we have to get to in this chapter. One is about writing books, and you've done that and I've done that. And I have a different view of writing books than Churchill does. He thinks it's great fun. I think it's a task to be done. And then we have to talk about Lord, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Cromer? Is it Lord Cromer, the British agent in Egypt? All right. So first of all, what do you make of his love of writing? Obviously, he loved it. He did it his whole life. He must have produced, 20 books?
Close to 50.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Is there anyone comparable? This is just an aside. Is there anyone comparable who is both a statesman who can win the Pulitzer Prize for literature?
The nearest I can think of is Cicero.
Yes.
And Churchill's books are different from Cicero's books. Some of Cicero's books are simply philosophic. Cicero was a very great man. Churchill was probably a greater statesman. But, that's a hard call.
Oh, Cicero failed to keep his republic together, Larry. I don't think that's close.
Yeah.
Cicero failed.
Yeah.
So, great speeches, better writer, maybe. But now, two more things. G.W. Stephen is in here. Boom the Boomsters. And he just notes in passing, as he did of his polo players, he died of typhoid fever, as many of his polo comrades had done the next year. And his polo comrades all got blown up in the Great War. It's really remarkable that Churchill lived to write this book.
Yeah. Churchill's military career is like the law enforcement career of Wyatt Earp. He was never wounded, and he was around a lot of bullets in his life. And he wrote to his mother early in his life, God did not make a force like me just to stop a bullet. So he thought it was providential.
Douglas MacArthur had the same attitude. He had a very bad nickname, Dugout Doug, which was not true. He was always exposing himself to fire, always indifferent to it. It's a remarkable trait among great individuals. MacArthur
and Churchill are two people I know, and I don't know many others, who were dashing, fighting in the trenches of World War I. And MacArthur wore a scarf, a white scarf, and cut quite a figure around the trenches, exposing himself to gunfire. And he carried his pipe, right? Well, Churchill would go on adventures with his troops in the night, crawling around in the, from hole to hole, spying out the Germans. And it was, there's several records of it, and it was kind of a lark. Churchill would, if you make a noise, the Germans will know where you are, and they can bring hell down on you. And so Churchill is always shushing them too loud. Shh, shh, and then everybody's trying to get him not to do it so loud. And then once he dropped his flashlight and made a clatter, and it came on, because they call it torch, and he said, turn off that bloody torch. And then, kind of too loud, and a little meek voice comes back, it's yours, sir.
I can only imagine rebuking Winston Churchill on a battlefield in no man's land. I can only imagine. Took some bravery on the part of that soldier. We'll be right back. Final conversation about this week's adventures with Winston, we should call it. Dr. Larry Arnn will be right back. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of our prior dialogues, Hugh for Hillsdale.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, the Hillsdale Dialogue underway. My Early Life is on the table, Winston Churchill's book about his early adventures. And we're getting close to Lord Cromer. We're going to talk a little bit about Churchill in Egypt now. All right, we have 2 minutes left. Lord Cromer, he is the British agent in Egypt. And I remember last week we were talking about wars to build democracy. Lord Cromer, quote, he might be nothing. He was, in fact, everything. But he was everything because he did not presume to be MacArthur in Japan or Ambassador Bremer in Iraq. He did not presume to be an autocrat. He worked the back room. Yeah.
Churchill liked the phrase applied to public figures, stooped to conquer.
Oh, that's Rosebery.
And Churchill, and Churchill was capable of that. But on the other hand, Churchill is, everybody's different, right? Churchill was flashy. He was, in my opinion, a very serious man. But he seemed, when you first met him, quick and sudden and pushy. But when you understand that, then you see these episodes in his life when the situation is very tense, and he waits, and he lets things develop. So he could do that too, right?
Yeah,
and,
Lord Cromer waited on events.
Courted.
He said he could wait weeks, months, years, decades. He would wait on events. Last question. This anti-Churchill movement you referred to last week, it doesn't have a prayer, does it? I mean, you can't topple Cicero or Churchill or any of the great figures who are also good guys. You can't topple Napoleon or Caesar either. They're bad guys in my view, but you can't topple the good guys.
Well, you can't topple anything in the past.
True.
It happened. And so, the guy, Darrell Cooper, who's out after Churchill, he accuses Churchill of wanting the war, which he didn't, and of sustaining the war over Poland. Churchill didn't even do that. He wasn't in power at the time. And so, that fact is not going to go away, right? It's a fact. And so they can't, and see, the interesting question is not, was Churchill right about this or that? What we can learn from Churchill and from any practical man, according to Aristotle, is how did he make these choices, and what can we learn from that? What is it like to make choices? And, that's learning in practical wisdom.
And next week, we're going to go to Oldham, and we're going to learn some very practical lessons in politics. I mean, everyone who wants to run for office should read this chapter, and we will be there next week in My Early Life. Dr. Larry Arnn, thank you. We'll be back next week with the next Hillsdale Dialogue.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.